right, welcome to this week's episode of our Shotmaker podcast. I'm really excited because we're going to turn a negative into a positive. We're going to look back at this year's baseball season for all of those Philly fans, the what could have been, but really turn that into a lesson of how do you know if you have a championship team, and ultimately how do you build a championship team? So first, taking a step back and looking at the Phillies, what do you think? They had all the talent, right? On paper, really thought this was their year.
Yeah, and they came up a little short, as we know.
A little bit.
And didn't, get to the World Series and become a champion. I think that's where we get in today. It's probably things that we've touched on maybe individually before on the podcast of leadership qualities or these things. But putting it all together as we wrap up the World Series, that I can say I did not watch one pitch of.
I watched a little bit.
Not one single pitch.
It was painful. It was painful, but yes. Because I think that's, the question so many times in business that we face, right? On paper, it looks like you've done everything right. Like you've prepared, you've worked on team dynamics, and then you get to the holiday weekend or the Friday night shift and...
Right. Doesn't go well. And it's a lot of similarities. I mean, obviously in baseball, there's only one champion. So if you're the Arizona Diamondbacks right now, you're probably still feeling pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? In the grand scheme of things, they're champions in their own mind. They won the National League pennant.
Yeah.
So I think as we compare it, there's the restaurants are a little bit different.
Yes.
On the fact of what's considered a win or,
yes.
Consider your team a championship team. But I think it all kind of correlates a little bit on what your team should look like for success.
Yes. Exactly. And I would say, for those of us in the office that know my opinion on this, I mean, one dynamic I would bring up is your big leaders, if they show up in the key moments, aka Bryce Harper, right? Do they show up? And is there something going on under the surface between your, big players that are expected to show up who maybe fall short and don't, and somehow that hurts the vibe of the team overall?
Yeah, I mean, obviously those guys are get paid what they do in Major League Baseball or any sport for that matter, because when it comes time to clutch or when it's time for playoffs or championships, they usually are the ones that you need to step up and hoping you get someone of your role players with you. And the Phillies really wasn't any of them those last few games, right? Whether it was Bryce Harper for Phillies fans, Trey Turner, Kyle Schwarber, Nick Castellanos, name one of them, it didn't really work out.
Yeah.
So, as we get into the restaurant, same thing, right? You have your people that you pay a higher level to, you're paying them more based on their experience, based on their skill level. That when it comes to Mother's Day or Valentine's Day or the holiday season, you're expecting them to be on their highest level.
And I think sometimes, especially in business, I think in sports, we all have that conversation, right? I mean, unfortunately for Bryce Harper, everybody knows what he's making. So everybody knows what is expected of him, right? But on the restaurant side or in business, sometimes we don't have that conversation with our ace, right? We think that they know that they're getting the best section or that they're getting the best schedule. And sometimes I think it's important to have that conversation up front, which is why this is a really timely episode. As much as it's about the end of the baseball season, we're also getting into the holiday season. So to say, okay, you are, the Bryce of your restaurant. Let's sit down and have that conversation before Thanksgiving week and before the holiday week and New Year's, and really say, I'm going to give you, this schedule, or this is what I expect of you. This is the pay that you're going to get. This is the bonus that you're eligible for, but we need to deliver and we need to drive the team forward.
And I've had many of those conversations in a restaurant of sometimes you said the reminder of you make this money because you're good at your job of this, but also the expectations are you're leading the team. You come in with a good attitude. There's going to be a time where there's a rough shift in the holidays, right? If you're busy for 2 or 3 weeks straight, chances are at some point during that time, something's going to go wrong.
Exactly.
And kind of making sure that either that top manager or that top line cook or that top server is on board with that. Like, hey, I want you to be part of the solution, not the part of the problem of complaining or wherever it might go.
Well, exactly. And I think the other part is really walking through a contingency plan, because we all know people are not going to show up to their shift. People are going to be sick. My grandma's sick, right? Like, we know this is going to happen. And I think a lot of times we've had calls with clients where it's like shocking that no one showed up on Father's Day or no one showed up on Mother's Day or whatever it is. But we can't have that oh my God, we're shocked and now we don't know what to do. We have to have a contingency plan or a couple of plans that say, worst thing happens, 5 people no show, 6 people no show. Like, what do we do then? Who do we bring in? Who do we call in? Maybe setting up some sort of incentive plan. I've seen that work where it's, X amount available to you if you don't no show over the next 6 months or 6 weeks, but something to make it where we're not reactive.
Right. Definitely getting creative makes sense. And then just better planning. I mean, I think sometimes we talk to clients and it's amazing like that they're a contingency plan, but if it's a holiday or something, it can't hurt to maybe have an extra body or someone's scheduled. And that's on the owner, the manager to do that. So when something happens, you're not, oh man, we're one person away from it's not going to work.
Right.
On the baseball side, it's why you have a pinch hitter that can, like JK, your favorite on that. The good teams have someone that when it's not going well, right? When someone in the lineup's not doing what they're supposed to do in a different level, you bring this person in. In basketball, you bring them off the bench and you try to start, a narrow rally, get runs, and in a restaurant, try to get the shift to go through, have that body.
Well, I agree with you because I think, we all want to run good margins, right? We all want to make sure that we're profitable. But so many times when you're looking at your profitability for December through September, it's very different for your profitability from October to the end of the year because you're going to have catering events. You're going to have big parties that inherently have better margins. So I don't think we want to die on the hill of let's run a sub 30 labor costs. I think you're right. Staff for 4 or 5 more, and sometimes it helps to just do the math of what that is. Like if you brought in 5 extra people, right? You have your I love JK. You have your JK who's just sitting on the sidelines waiting for his chance, right? What does that really cost you, right? Because for the extra $100, $200, it's worth it for the peace of mind that you, owner, your phone's not ringing and you're not having to drive in at 8 o'clock on a Friday night to just finish out the shift.
Yeah, and I think, I've always known, the theory and owners are kind of the same philosophy of, do you want the success of your holiday season or that shift or anything on maybe an 18-year-old front desk staff member or maybe a 16-year-old busboy. That's if you're one of them away from calling out that's going to make you come in at the bus tables, you probably want to add another buster. Like to me, that's the philosophy of that. It's just not worth the risk reward's not there.
Yeah.
And if you're getting ready for a busy holiday season, now again, if you're in an area where that's your slowest month, different story. But for 95% of the restaurants that are gearing up for their Super Bowl time.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why I think, a great exercise is just doing the math on that weekly schedule. What's, fully loaded schedule versus middle. Because remember, that fully loaded probably is really not going to happen, right? Those people really aren't going to show up for their shift, or at least not all of them will. So again, keeping that in mind. So, okay, we went through consistency and obviously outstanding performance of our, key players. The next one is, community engagement, right? I think really good exercise now, especially as you get into the holiday season, is to look at your performers that engage with their customers, that people know, because that also is sometimes an intangible quality that we forget to look for when we're looking at our staff.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes, and I remember learning this a long, long time ago, one of the executives of a company I worked for said, think about your best serve. Think in my head, like, who's my best server? I'm like, that person is because they come in to do me favors. Yeah. They stay late. They do, and he's like, well, that's not really your best server. Your best server is the one with the biggest tips because they're taking care of our customers, our guests. That's your best server. And it's just that philosophy change of sometimes looking around your staff, like who's the ones really being an ambassador for your brand?
Yeah.
Whether it's a front desk person that maybe just like, wow, you look over there and they walk around the restaurant like they're the mayor of the restaurant. They know everybody. And you don't maybe realize that in a day-to-day of what that person brings to the table. It could be someone in the kitchen that just comes, you don't know, that's great with all your vendors.
Yes.
There's just so many people that maybe go under the radar because they're not the ones that are bailing you out and come in on Saturday night.
Right. And sometimes they're not always the ones that are showing up the, most consistently or everything else. But I agree, that's where they have a place on the team, probably different from, our leader or our top performer overall. but still a really valuable element of our team as we get to the holidays, because people are coming, and I think a lot of times as owners, we get stressed out about this. It's like, I got a party of 60, I got a party of 30, whatever it is, and it's this added work. But those people have picked your location for something memorable in their life, right? Whether it's a company party or a family get together. And so that person, while they may not be perfect in other areas, we may want them to lead that little group, because that's going to make a memorable experience. Because ultimately, these parties are a great way to introduce your operation to people maybe who are not part of your regular customers.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, all right. So as we look back at, the Phillies, the World Series, we're trying to build our own championship team. What do you think is the one thing that set apart, the true world champions from everybody else?
That's tough, because there were, I think, unfortunately, in this, for the Phillies, there were just a few different areas that all kind of at the same time, right? Like you said, your clutch hitters really didn't perform.
Yeah.
And then you had your closing pitcher who has a very specific job to do. Come in and close the game. And the game, he doesn't do that. So, right, be like, you're very specific. Your line cook, he's got one dish to make. Your prep cook has one item to make, and they keep messing it up.
Yeah.
And then your manager made some questionable decisions.
Yeah.
Same thing as in the restaurant business, right? There's times where a manager maybe lets someone call off, or maybe, depending on where you're in the country, doesn't open the patio when it should be open. Yeah. So I feel like if you relate them back and forth, a lot of decisions unfortunately go into not being a champion, and it's not usually just one.
Well, and I think that's where, as we go into the holiday season, to remember, it's not going to be perfect, right? Even if the Phillies had won, there still would have been a handful of things that were questionable throughout the year. So win or lose, you're always going to have the parts of the day or the parts of the game that don't work out. But I think it's also important to remember to set aside time, to know you already have that time set aside of, January 10th, we're going to have, a meeting of our management team, and we're going to look back. So as things are like, you let this person call out, right? Rather than get mad in the moment, right? Maybe it's even keep a little notebook. Because again, we're not living or dying by this holiday season alone, right? We're trying to get better every year. We're trying to grow as a team. So I like the idea of keeping a notebook, so we're not, throwing dishes in the kitchen during our holiday rush. But there will be a time to address these things and make them learning moments, so that every holiday season we're getting better.
Yeah, and now a lot of technology, a lot of times there's like digital logbooks.
Yes.
And we would always use that really for the holiday almost every day. But after every holiday, all right, let's really assess. Yeah. What did we run out of? When did we run out of it? All right. Did we have enough staff? Yes. Yeah. Yes. 5 bussers was what we needed this night. No, we needed this now. So when you do it next year during that schedule, you're like, oh yeah, I don't remember that from 365 days ago. But now that I'm looking at it, I know to order this. I know to staff like this.
Well, and I think that's the other part of the unique place of where we are now is you probably didn't have to do that before, right? There was probably a time in your business, if you've been around more than 5 years, where this was kind of on autopilot, right? Everybody knew what to do Thanksgiving week. Everyone knew what New Year's looked like, busy or not, right? And everyone just had those set times throughout the next 6 weeks, so they knew what that was. That doesn't exist now, probably, right? Like your staff has turned over, your managers have turned over. So it's frustrating if you've been around a long time to know that you have to now go backwards and remember some of these things. But, my thought is if you do it this year, you're building new memories that, you can carry on into 24. So hopefully we can get back to that point in time that our staff knows. But I think it's unrealistic, regardless of what you've paid for your management staff, because one could argue that you probably pay more now than you did 5 years ago.
You did.
Right. But putting that aside, working together and not assuming anybody knows how to write a holiday week schedule or anyone knows how to write a Thanksgiving schedule, but just working together will guarantee that you will move forward and get better into next year.
Yeah, like Angela said, the front end is very important right now. Take that time now. You'll have a lot less frustrations as you get there when you say, well, why didn't you order this? And they say, well, you never told me. If you looked over the order right now. And then back to, the notes is, half your team this year probably won't be there next year. And that's the other part. I mean, I've said this before. I mean, as a manager, I would always look at my team and say, half you guys aren't going to be here next year.
Yeah.
And that's good or bad. Some are going to get promoted. Some are going to go help with, in corporate world, new restaurant openings. So it wasn't like they were all getting fired over the course of the year. One person probably leaves to another company, right? But in theory, if you look around, half will not be there next year for whatever reasons. And I think if owners look like that as building these systems up, building that, all right, I'm going to put this order that we did this year, I'm going to put it in a notebook. So whoever does the order next year can actually look at that specific order or that specific staff schedule. Yeah. Next year's going to be so much easier. It's like, oh, well, I have a schedule written. Doesn't matter what names are there. Just how many people did we have on the line? What times did we bring people in? Yeah. How did it go?
Well, and I think that's where, as an owner, I think the, really successful owners that we see know when they just have to jump in and not do it, right? Not wash dishes. That's not what we're saying. Right. But step in ahead of time to make sure that you have your own accountability checklist. So that schedule that goes out makes sense. That order that went out makes sense. You're not running out of filet, right? When the party of 50 is all going to order filet, right? Like there are a certain check that as the owner, this might be the time that you just have to jump in, but it's for the good of the team.
At least when it happens, you can kind of live and die by what you did. Yeah. Right. To me, if I didn't order right or I missed it, I can live with it. I know. Yeah. Hey, I can't blame anyone. That's what it is. So, for you as the owner, if you look over, you validate, you say I sign off on, and then if you're 20%, 30%, 40% busier than last year, okay, that's a great problem to have. Yes. And adjust. But at least you can't be like in hindsight, wow, if I would have just spent 3 extra hours on the first week in November, wow, look at all the extra sales I would have done the second half of November, December. You don't want to look back at that and say, man, I really could have improved my end of year, but because I phoned it in now. Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's the other part of sports is that even though we saw, one champion in the World Series, I mean, they're really working on that in April, right? To have those clutch performances, when they did under the lights in the World Series, I mean, you're really working on that for months and months and months. And I think that's the other part that we can all take away from the World Series is, the preparation starts now. I mean, I remember, every year it's like, all right, pitchers and catchers are showing up in like March, right? And they don't end until now, but this is the time. And so for all of us in hospitality, this is the time to really make sure that when the pressure moments are there, we're ready.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us in this week's episode. For more information about the Lager Group and all of the things that we can help move your operations forward, check out our website at thelagergroup.com.